Yeehaw summer is over. Now it's yeehaw fall. I'll be rootin' and tootin' for as long as it fucking takes. Thank you to my patrons and Incogni for making this nightmare possible. I made a video essay about the nightmarish abuse I received as a child, and YouTube deleted it. While of course making sure to let me know that they do make exceptions for art. I like to consider myself a half-decent writer, but I guess I can't be that good. I cannot find the words to describe how disgusted I have become with this website and the machine they employed to judge the quality of my work. AI cannot make art because AI can't get Western Apache Raiding and Warfare contains the testimony of Anna Price, a daughter of a White Mountain Apache chief named Eshkeldahsilah, or He is Constantly Angry. There's been some confusion caused by Western Apache Raiding and Warfare, but he is a different guy from Diablo, a later chief. For simplicity's sake, I will refer to him by his translated name, He is Constantly Angry. Anna's testimony is adorable because she's an old lady at the time her testimony was recorded, but she's clearly so proud of her dad. Her testimony is also terrifying. The Yavapai steal some horses. Horses which belonged to He is Constantly Angry and his family. So, he calls a council of his warriors, they agree this is unacceptable, they go to the Yavapai village, they find the women, they kill all of them except for one old lady, and then He is Constantly Angry says this, Hey, I didn't want to come here and have to do this. You made me do this. Don't make me do it again. Don't fuck with my horses. Then he went and he killed the men. He gives a similar speech to the Navajo later after they did a sneak attack on him and his White Mountain homeboys. It appears this was his personal philosophy. Indeed, it is the best story I've found for illustrating the Apache perspective on violence and retribution. He is Constantly Angry was not concerned with whether or not his response was proportional. He is Constantly Angry was a results-oriented kind of guy. My father said, I am satisfied now. I've done this last and they did it first. It was just as if they asked us to come over to their country. The Yavapai never came back after our horses again. They were scared of us, I guess. The Apache were a raiding society, which is to say that raiding constituted a legitimate economic activity in their culture. You know how it is, you want to feed your family, so you gotta clock in at the stealing shit from Mexicans factory. Although I do want to say that the Apache definitely distinguished between raids and warfare. What He is Constantly Angry did here, that was not a raid. It seems that raids were only ever really violent by accident. I am here for your sheep. But as far as Apache warfare was concerned, they only practiced total war. The Apaches made a marked distinction between raiding and warfare. In the language of the Western Apaches, the word for raiding, to search out enemy property, and the word for warfare, to take death from an enemy, revealed their view of the two separate activities. The return of a victorious war party was celebrated with a dance, and if adult captives had been taken, with their torture and eventual execution by close female relatives of the warrior, whose death the party had been sent to avenge. Could you imagine being taken apart slowly by a grieving Apache widow? Side note, the Apache did not name their kids until their personality developed, so He is Constantly Angry's mom, like she didn't just make a lucky guess. The horse to the Apache was food, it was transportation, it was status, it was even a hot wife. Not directly. You use the horses as a dowry, right? You trade them to the father of the bride, or you use the horses to take the bride. Your idea of normal is, it's not baked into the fabric of the universe. It's a consequence of history. Your idea of normal was a gift and a curse given to you by your fathers as their fathers gave it to them. Our idea of normal is a conversation which we are constantly having. This was normal here. Don't fuck with an Apache chief's horses. Gentlemen, I don't know if just describing violence can get your channel removed, but we'll see if YouTube is indeed as bitch-made as I suspect they are as we embark upon this, my Apache Wars trilogy. Subscribe. I never ask, but just do it. All my videos are ad-free because YouTube decided you don't need homemade Peach Cobbler. No, you deserve the slop. But before we continue with a tale of genuine Apache vengeance, He is Constantly Angry. He probably didn't want to do this stuff. He just wanted no one to fuck with his horses, and this was a means to an end. Particularly his war with the Navajo, his former allies, it seems to have truly troubled him. My father had said when he started to war, "My heart is moving within me just as the sun moves overhead. That is the way the killing of my relatives makes me feel. When a man gets mad, his heart beats hard and fast. This is what he meant. What happens if you don't just fuck with an Apache's horses, but indeed try to destroy their freedom, their culture, and their way of life?
Do you know what I'm sick of? The persistent background radiation of pain and meaninglessness which permeates life. Also, all these fucking scam text messages I keep getting, half the time they are job recruiters informing me about positions which will pay me $10 billion a day to look at cat pictures from home or whatever. First of all, I'm a YouTuber, and that sounds way too hard. Second of all, I don't think that's real. I think you're just trying to steal my information so that you can get all my Robux. Yep, all these scam messages and calls, they sure are annoying. And with Incogni, they can finally be avoided. Your personal information is right now being collected and sold by data brokers. And the worst part is not only how easy it is to find your data, but also, you know, who is trying to find it. Landlords, scammers, bad actors, and potential employers for real jobs. Life is already difficult and painful enough without this added anxiety. While you can theoretically find and request your data be removed from these websites yourself, these sites are numerous, slimy, and tricky. Incogni will take care of all of that for you. Sure, you may miss out on incredible job opportunities written in broken English, but you will be able to navigate life and the internet safely with your privacy intact, as Incogni tirelessly hunts down these sites on your behalf. Incogni has not only saved me from cat food lunches this month, but can also save you from scam phone calls, identity theft, and these constant violations of your privacy. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Use code DJPeach at the link below to get 60% off an annual plan. Thank you, Incogni, for sponsoring this video.
Around 1500, possibly 1700, a group of Athapascan-speaking peoples migrated down from Canada along the eastern edge of the Rocky Mountains. We can't say what moved them to migrate to the southern Great Plains and desert southwest, but we can say with certainty that a schism occurred once they arrived. And I'm not going to really have like the pie face skit thing that I do in general. There are too many dead babies, all right? There's a certain level of dead babies. I can't do the goofy stuff. Like, I'll make jokes about Serbia, but we're not doing the skits, except for this one. You get one.
Alright, so we've completed our mysterious exodus from the frozen far north. Now it's time to pick our gimmick. Gimmick? It's all about the PR. You gotta have a thing, you see. I was thinking, what if we made our thing these little fucking baskets? Listen, I appreciate that you have a marketing degree, but I just want to raise these fluffy animals here. They provide not only food, but also wool for clothing and blankets. We'll be shepherds. Oh, that sort of interferes with this other thing I was gonna do with these big dick monster creatures? What were you gonna do with...
The Navajo would take to raising sheep and farming as old world animals and crops made their way northwards from the heart of the Spanish Empire in North America, central Mexico. It's a long sentence, I'm sorry. I'm gonna start selling Adderall on the DJ Peach Cobbler. The Apache would maintain a more mobile hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which they did supplement with some farming and, you know, the constant raiding of both Mexican and other natives. It's called being primal. The Apache would regard farming as a feminine pursuit and jokingly call Mexicans and other native groups their shepherds. The Spanish slave trade of Indians would shape the Apache in the centuries before Americans arrived to the region. Apache rancherias would be victimized by Spanish slaving raids at first, and then later, Comanche slaving raids. Comanche captive taking introduced Apaches from the east, Navajos from the west, and Pawnees from the north into New Mexico. The Comanche's radius of action was astonishing. In 1731, a New Mexican friar asked one of the Comanche's captives to which nation he belonged, and how far it was to his country of origin. The slave responded that he was a Pawnee, quite possibly a Pawnee, whose traditional homeland was along the North Platte and Loup Rivers in present-day Nebraska. If you're a child, you think I'm saying it's white people's fault that the Apache raided their neighbors. If you're a truly intelligent, mature adult, you understand that I'm not saying it's white people's fault. That's obviously ridiculous. Spanish aren't white. You see, I'm an actual racist, a learned, scientific racist. If you've ever even looked at the Mediterranean, you lose your Hyperborean card. White people only come from a single village in Wales, whose name non-white tongues cannot pronounce. The general narrative that Europeans with superior technology would just steamroll natives wherever they found them, it truly breaks down in the modern American Southwest. The Spanish were incapable of defeating many native groups, among them my problematic kings, the Karankawa. Hey guys, sometimes. Once again, libs, it's called being primal. I've identified 3 broad policies the Spanish employed against the Apache after Apache raids against Spanish settlements really began in earnest in the early 18th century. Policy 1. We're Europeans, let's just do the thing. Beginning with the regulation of 1772, the Spaniards adopted a harshly militaristic policy in the face of increasing Apache raids. They were to be fought in battle, soundly defeated, and the survivors were to be made into prisoners and slaves. It didn't quite work out. In effect, this policy advocated an arrogant benevolence in which the compassionate conquerors would treat all prisoners well because they were potential converts to Christianity. They would incarcerate all prisoners near presidios or send them as slaves to the interior, where Spanish officials planned to enlighten these heathens through education and then conversion. Eminent historian Max L. Moorhead termed this the most brutal Indian policy ever sanctioned by the King of Spain. Yeah, that didn't work. Policy 2. Let's give them treats. Has anyone tried giving them treats? The Spanish Empire would establish establecimientos, where Apache would be housed, protected, and taught the ways of civilization. Yeah, this is beginning to sound a little familiar. Although few Americans are aware of it, the Spanish military established a system of reservations for Mescalero and Chiricahua Apaches nearly a century before Geronimo's famous surrender in 1886. Rather than raid the frontier for livestock as they had in the past, these Apaches opted to receive rations of meat in exchange for serving as scouts and auxiliary troops with Spanish soldiers. If you'd like to learn more about these ill-fated reservations, then I highly recommend the dissertation that I just quoted. That also did not work. Most importantly, with Mexico achieving independence, this system would break down along with the presidios, or forts, on Mexico's northern frontier. So, you lost your military defense, and you stopped giving them treats. All at the same time, huh? Policy 3. Run! Run now! The situation America stumbled into during the Mexican-American War was a fucking nightmare, as the United States made manifest our destiny of creating a series of mass graves and building parking lots over them. It was the Apache who would prove to be the fiercest of foes. The Apache had enforced their autonomy and independence many times before, often with great success. The Apache Wars would last 30 years when all was said and done, and this video will mostly cover the first 10 or so of them. They were messy, complicated, and genuinely nightmarish. I've read about still living little girls hung from meat hooks, scalped babies, and men buried up to their necks so that ants could eat their still living skulls clean. This video will focus mostly on the Chiricahua Apache. I'm sorry, Tonto Apache. Like most histories of the Apache Wars, I'm just gonna talk about that time that George Crook fed you your own bones. By the way, I've been learning Spanish. Tonto means silly. Imagine being the silly Apache. The Chiricahua Apache is a group designation, mostly which exists for ethnographical purposes. It's not so much like a political structure that they had, right? 4 Apache tribes fell under this designation: the Chokonen, the Badonkohe, the Nedni, and the Chihene. And none of that will be on the test, I promise. It's okay. But I am going to ask you the name of that Welsh village, so I hope you wrote it down. Hello, DJ Peach Cobbler later, realizing I forgot to record something. The Apache homeland was known as the Apacheria, and it was the borders established by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and the Gadsden Purchase, which would divide this territory. It's important to note that the Apache prized freedom above all else. And while we as Americans mostly use the word freedom as, freedom to choose where to park, the Apache meant it in every aspect of their life. Freedom was the greatest treasure to an Apache. The most unimaginable of tortures was to be taken, bound, imprisoned. An Apache man was really only beholden to his family and not so much his chief. The sheer hatred between Mexican and Apache will be further expanded upon in my next video, but what should be known is this. many of the greatest Apache warriors would earn names in combat with the Spanish and Mexicans. It may seem like it may be an insult to use this name instead of their proper Apache name, but they held these names with great pride. The reason I bring this up is, well, it's an important part of understanding the Apache, but also, imagine being so hardcore you get 2 of those names. I found a cool rock in that dry creek over there. It's for me. It's not for you. I don't even like it. I'm gonna find a cooler rock later. Mangas coloratus is the only Apache warrior I could find thus far who held not just 1, but 2 Spanish exonyms. Edwin Sweeney outlined in his biography of Mangas, he was originally known as Fuerte, or Strong. Chief Chad would become more well known by his later name, however, Mangas coloratus, or Red Sleeves. Mangas coloratus was the 6'6" warrior chief of the Chihenne Apache. Mangas struck fear into the heart of every man unfortunate enough to be his foe. Among his foes were white people, but he didn't want that. No, Mangas, and I hope to make this perfectly clear, was not just a fierce warrior chief and a man you didn't want to sit behind at the movies. No, he was a diplomat and a statesman. He was a peacemaker who hated Mexicans. When the White Eyes, or Jive Turkeys, first came across the Apache of the American Southwest, they were both fighting a common enemy because, well, it wasn't the American Southwest yet. During the Mexican-American War, not only did Mangas coloratus establish a peaceful relationship with the Hunkies, he even went, "Hey, you want some help? Homie, we're with you here. We just met, but I got a good feeling about this one. Me and you, let's get him!" You tell Mangas coloratus you're here to kill Mexicans, and brother, he high-fives you, and he starts hatching schemes. In 1846, the first year of the Mexican-American War, Mangas met General Stephen Watts Kearny, pledged friendship with the Norteamericanos and his fighting men as allies should the new rulers of the Southwest desire to plunge into Chihuahua, Durango, and Sonora. The offer was refused. Mangas coloratus always wanted peace with the white man, and in 1852 signed a treaty with the U.S. He had a problem with Mexicans, and, well, he had good reason to. Major John Grenier asked Mangas why he continued his war so savagely with the Mexicans, and the Apache replied, "I will tell you. Some time ago, my people were invited to a feast. Whiskey was there. My people drank and became intoxicated, and were lying asleep when a party of Mexicans came in and beat out their brains with clubs. At another time, a trader was sent among us from Chihuahua. While innocently engaged in trading, a cannon concealed behind the goods was fired upon my people, and quite a number were killed. How can we make peace with such people?" The fact is that violence, by its very nature, is cyclical. I'm not taking sides in this centuries-old blood feud. Listen, I'm a registered centrist. I don't even vote in elections. I just write on the ballot that Florida belongs to Serbia, then I go home. Mangas was not a centrist, of course. Mangas, like every other Apache of the 19th century, hated Mexicans. That feeling was certainly mutual. At this time, the Mexican state of Sonora famously held a bounty on Apache scalps, 100 for a man's, 50 for a woman's, 25 for a child's. That hatred for the Mexicans pushed Mangas to become a diplomat not only with the Americans, but with other Apache. The Apache were, to quote a fucking lunatic, pure Democrats. There was no Apache Confederation, no unity between tribes, and indeed many of them had beef with one another. This would become a problem when it came to making peace with them, because you needed to make peace with all of them, and, you know, keep that peace. Listen, I hate to be so openly racist, but you cannot trust Americans to keep to the terms of a treaty. Mangas would indulge in that most sacred of racist traditions by marrying a Mexican woman. She was apparently very hot. This matters, because Mangas pioneered a method of statecraft known as bad Latina diplomacy. Mangas would marry his consequently hot daughters with other Apache chiefs, and supposedly also a Navajo chief. Among his new in-laws was also, he is constantly angry. Wouldn't it be nice if something came of that? Shortly after he became chief, Eshkeldahsilah married a daughter of Mangas coloratus, the prominent Chiricahua Apache leader. Things did not work out with his new bride. She wouldn't stop vacuuming while he was trying to play Warzone with the boys. It was the alliance Mangas engineered with Cochise, chief of the Chokonen, which would serve as his greatest diplomatic masterstroke, which, you know, helped make up for his greatest diplomatic failure, because he couldn't prevent his people's raids into Mexico, which the US absolutely gave a fuck about. The 1850s were largely a time of peace between the U.S. and the Chiricahua Apache. We promised to prevent Indian raids into Mexico in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War. You try telling Mangas to be nice to the Mexicans. See how that works out for you. Also, it's the 1850s, and we didn't actually care. An account showing the relative safety of travel through the Chiricahua and Chihenne country at that time was written by Hank Smith, who later became a pioneer settler on the High Plains. It seems to have been in the spring of 1859 that he was employed to drive 1,200 head of cattle from Fort Buchanan, west of the Chiricahua's range, to Fort Bliss at El Paso. He had 12 Mexican vaqueros to assist him, and a military escort of a sergeant and 10 troopers accompanied him as far as Apache Pass. Large bands of Indians, 50 or 100 warriors, met him, but always in a friendly spirit, making no attempt to scatter or steal the cattle. On 2 occasions, they requested and received a beef to butcher and eat. At other times, they conducted the drovers to water holes and assisted in watering the herd, asking a beef or 2 in payment. At the Mimbres River, Mangas Coloradus' band was friendly and helpful. There, the men rested the herd for 2 days, engaging in racing contests with the Indians. At Fort Bliss, they turned the cattle over, but such peaceable relations were not to last. The year is 1861. Apacheria has largely fallen under U.S. jurisdiction, but that jurisdiction is negligible. The white population numbers only a few thousand in Arizona, and a United States Army officer is about to fuck up so bad it starts 30 years of war. At this time, a young boy by the name of Felix Ward, along with 20 head of cattle, were stolen from his family's ranch by Apache raiders. Lieutenant Bascom was told by his superiors to recover the stolen boy, and it was through this that Bascom would make his way into the history books. We call what happened next the Bascom Affair. Bascom would meet with Chief Cochise in a temporary camp he set up. Once again, the Chiricahua specifically were on as good a terms with the U.S. Army as an Indian tribe in the 19th century could possibly be. The Chiricahua, true Democrats they may be, held profound respect for Mangas, and so, they kept all the raiding down south in Mexico. All the same, Bascom believed that Cochise was involved in Felix Ward's kidnapping. So you can imagine Cochise's surprise. He's drinking coffee. LT Shit for Brains is explaining how he needs Cochise to help recover this child. And Cochise is like, yeah, of course I'll help you. I mean, what are Apache friends for, if not that? Cochise is then informed that he's not going anywhere, and they're not friends. Cochise and his family, who's with them in the tent, are now made prisoner. For about 5 seconds. Us wide-eyed honkies, we call this the Bascom Affair. The Apache, however, forever afterwards, even until today, give it a much more laconic name, as they tend to do. They call it Cut the Tent. Shoot them down, Bascom shouted as Cochise leapt from the tent. Felix Ward's father pulled his pistol and fired, wounding Cochise in the leg. The chief scrambled up the side of the canyon wall, trailing blood as he dodged back and forth from boulder to boulder. Siphon Canyon echoed with musket fire as several of the soldiers fired after him. From the ridgetop, Cochise looked down on the soldier camp. Only then did he realize that he had been wounded in the leg and that, inexplicably, he still carried a tin coffee cup in his hand. Cochise and Mangas would together wage war against the White Eyes once the Bascom Affair completely spiraled out of control. Truly, this was a war the U.S. government would regret starting, as this was, of course, the beginning of the white boy kerfuffle, as the Apache called it. An Arizona politician would say this of the Bascom Affair. The cost of the war against Cochise would have purchased John Ward a string of oxen reaching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And as for his woman's son, Mickey Free, he afterwards became an Indian scout and interpreter, and about as infamous a scoundrel as those who generally adorn that profession. Felix Ward would become known afterwards by the name of Mickey Free, and would be traded by the Aravaipa Apache who captured him to the White Mountain Apache who adopted him. This was not an uncommon phenomenon, as many children, white, Indian, or Mexican, would be adopted and raised by the Apache who took them in. In our next video, we will discuss in depth the case of a little German boy who was taken by Mescalero Apache. He couldn't run from the Apache. He was full of chocolate. Frankly, I hate if I teased you, but this video is not going to be as bloody and brutal. It doesn't really get bleak until the 1870s. Hell, the U.S. Army, they didn't even hang Cochise' wife or son, only his adult male family members. I guess, I don't know, we were liberals or something. The 1860s would of course be a horribly bloody time, however. Tale of the Bascom affair would spread to other Apache, and demonstrate clearly that the White Eyes could not be trusted.
White men killed Apache babies, and even justified the killing under the eugenic aphorism, "Nits make lice." In 1864, a group of Arizonans decided to hunt Apaches on the Verde River. Among their number was an escaped convict known as Sugarfoot Jack. After the party burned to the ground a hastily abandoned village of Wickiups, the shelters made of brush in which the Apache lived, this desperado found an infant who had been left behind. He tossed the baby onto the fire, then stood and watched it burn. A little later, he found another small child. According to a witness, Sugarfoot dangled the baby on his knee, tickled it under the chin, then pulled out his gun and shot it in the head, bespattering his clothes and face with infant brains.
The Bascom affair would conclude with Cochise's Apache and the Army both killing hostages that they had captured, for the purposes of a negotiation, which never took place. War between the Chiricahua and the U.S. had begun.
Every week or so, from April through June, Cochise and his soldiers attacked small parties of whites. The Apaches rode all over southeastern Arizona, their targets forming no pattern that American soldiers could fathom. They killed everyone they found, included small children, and stripped their bodies. Typically, they pierced a corpse with hundreds of lance thrusts. As Cochise's campaign waxed into early summer, his forces grew. The first raids may have been waged by as few as 30 warriors. By June, he commanded almost 100.
The war would be proceeding well for the Chiricahua until the Battle of Apache Pass. This is where the Apache for the first time encountered heavy artillery. It didn't go great, and a full retreat of the Apache warriors commenced once Mangas Coloradus was wounded in the chest and fell off his horse.
Cochise was determined to save Mangas's life. He placed his father-in-law in a sling, and with an escort of warriors rode steadily southward for 100 miles into Mexico to the village of Llanos. A Mexican surgeon of great reputation lived there, and as he was presented with the helpless body of Mangas Coloradus, he was given a terse ultimatum. Make him well. If he dies, this town will die.
You don't have insurance, you gotta play hardball. The Battle of Apache Pass would teach the Apache to employ hit-and-run tactics afterwards. After that battle, the Apache would strike suddenly and retreat back into the caves, mountains, and canyons of the American Southwest. All right, now the Comanche were scary. They'd charge you screaming. You'd know you were fighting the Comanche because all of a sudden your pants were full. Not so with the Apache. You did not know you were fighting the Apache. You just stopped breathing all of a sudden. Mangas would recover from his wounds, but it's important to note here that while Mangas was a great warrior, he was also a very old one. Almost 70 years old, and being made to fight a war against a group of people that he had only ever wanted peace with. He was probably confused, like, brother, you see how much Mexico is left? Mangas would petition the U.S. for peace on several occasions, and certainly the Chiricahua Apache would have settled for peace, until Mangas tried to negotiate with the U.S., and they treacherously imprisoned him, tortured him, and shot him to death. Then he was scalped, his whole head was removed, boiled, and creeps wrote books about his fucking skull. Probably shouldn't have done that. The Chiricahua Apache would call this a great insult, a barbaric mutilation of their great warrior and chief, an act of cowardice and treachery, which destroyed any possible chance of peace for a decade. I call it science. We had to do math on his skull. But yeah, you really should not have done that. To quote from Asa de Kluge, the Apache translator for Geronimo's autobiography.
To an Apache, the mutilation of the body is much worse than death, because the body must go through eternity in the mutilated condition. Little did White Eyes know what they were starting when they mutilated Mangas Coloradus. While there was little mutilation previously, it was nothing compared to what was to follow.
I should note here that while the Apache did employ scalping, that was something that was done to them far more than they did it to others in general. There was a profit incentive for people to do it to them. Oh, also, it turns out that Apache scalps and other Indian scalps, and quite frankly Mexican scalps, all sort of look the fucking same. Now, this might shock you. Turns out that scalp hunters are not very honest people, and the Mexican government would pay for Mexican scalps. It was around this time that my favorite quote about the Apache Wars was stated by Reddit meme and all-around rat-faced snake bitch, Sherman. Listen, I don't know nothing about that white boy kerfuffle. I like Indians, and he was a rat-faced bitch. That being said, he was sometimes very funny. We had one war with Mexico to take Arizona, and we should have another to make her take it back. The 1860s in Apacheria were a bloodbath, particularly after Mangas' death in 1863. Historian Dan Thrapp, in Chapter 5 of his indispensable The Conquest of Apacheria, attributes this to a few things. The military command in that region was split between multiple departments and subsequently was incredibly disorganized, and there were simply not enough troops. Between the lines of Thrapp's Conquest of Apacheria, like this truth is what lives. This was America's 19th century Vietnam. The rocks could talk, but it is our most difficult fights which reveal our strongest warriors, and among them was Lieutenant Cushing. Of all the gallant soldiers who served on the southwest frontier, none was braver, none more admired, no man so relentless or successful in pursuit of the elusive and deadly Indians as Howard Bass Cushing. Cushing, being so respected and admired as an Indian fighter, was given the freedom to wage war against the Apache wherever and however he wished. Being such a big dick bad boy, he thought to attack what he saw as the root of the problem: Cochise, who after the death of Mangas was the most powerful and respected chief of the Chiricahua. During this pursuit, Cushing was ambushed and killed in 1871. Newspapers at the time credited the death to Cochise. This could have been because Cochise was just the big bad to which all Apache depredations were attributed, or it was simply too embarrassing that the greatest Indian fighter in Arizona never even saw the fucker. No, the leader of the sneak attack against Cushing, it didn't sound like Cochise. Cochise was hot. 6 feet tall, Roman nose, very noble bearing. Every guy that met Cochise described how dreamy this motherfucker was. And while Cochise was hot, whoever attacked Cushing, he was not. This is history that I'm doing right now. No, Cochise was not the man who killed the greatest Indian fighter a citation needed. The Apache who led the attack was tall, yes, but very broad and stocky. Interestingly, he didn't speak during the engagement. He used only hand signals. Cushing had made it his personal vendetta to hound Cochise to his death, and as he crisscrossed Arizona killing Apaches, he was convinced that he was close to cornering his worthy adversary. At the same time, Joe, a chief Cushing had never heard of, had made it his own mission to bring the gallant and cocksure lieutenant to his downfall. Joe's antipathy had formed when he learned of an army attack on a camp of peaceful Mescalero Apache in New Mexico, apparently led by Cushing. The soldiers had left everyone dead except for 2 women, both shot in the leg. When the comrades of the dead set about burying their bodies, the soldiers stole their horses. Enraged by this treacherous attack, Joe developed a personal obsession with Cushing. As Joe's son recalled many years later, other White-Eyes were killed too. I don't know how many. We weren't all the time counting the dead as the soldiers did. Joe wasn't much interested in the troops, just Cushing. You may be wondering, what's with the communicating with hand signals thing that I'm talking about? To be clear, I did not make this discovery. This has been well known for decades, thanks to the work of Yves Ball. But why am I mentioning the fact that he communicated with hand signals? Well, Joe had a very severe stutter. Joe stuttered badly when he talked, but he could sing well, and he had good songs, and many of them, Concierge said, when he talked, he kept moving his foot because he stuttered so badly. That seemed to help him say the words. Cushing's death was a tremendous blow to Jive Turkey morale. Cochise and his warriors continued to strike at will across Arizona and New Mexico, and no white man ever set eyes upon him and lived afterwards. Don't send a soldier to do a frontier weirdo's job. Tom Jeffords was a mailman who, quite simply, got sick of all his couriers dying. You gotta understand, this was the worst time to be a mailman in the American Southwest. So far. So Jeffords committed himself to what must have seemed a one-way trip to meet Cochise, the most feared Apache chief. Jeffords claimed that he walked right into Cochise's stronghold in the Dragoon Mountains and said, "Hey, stop fucking with my mailmen." And Cochise said, "Alright." The Apache claimed that Jeffords was captured, but showed no fear in captivity, and it was due to this lack of fear that Cochise extended to him at first respect, then later friendship. What is known is that the two would become friends. A film was made depicting the two as blood brothers. Apache didn't have a ritual like that. They were simply bros. Jeffords desired only to secure safe passage for his mail carriers, which he did accomplish, as well as making a buddy. But history had greater plans for the man that the Apache would come to call Taglito, or Redbeard, and who Cochise himself would come to call brother. I have before communicated the tragedy of the Camp Grant massacre, which you can watch here, or possibly here. I'm such a centrist, I don't even know which way is left and which is right. What you need to know is that the story started with an Aravaipa Apache chief attempting to make peace with the United States, and it ended with some dead Aravaipa Apache babies. Lots of stories here ended with dead babies, so that's just, you gotta get used to that one. To be fair to the US government, the massacre which occurred at Camp Grant was neither ignored nor justified by the broader United States. Ulysses S. Grant, probably particularly annoyed that there's now a massacre named after him, threatened to place the territory of Arizona under martial law. A significant public outcry did also take place. The Arizona problem, the sheer violence which continued to be perpetrated by Anglo, Mexican, and Indian alike, was at this time becoming a part of the national conversation. I'm just going to be squinting during this whole bit. I've been filming all day, hoofing it around this beautiful park, but it's fucking bright. Change was needed in Arizona, and that change came in the form of two new officers to fix the mess. First we have George Crook, a figure of profound importance. On a personal note, I want to like him. He certainly had personality, you know, and for me that's a big thing. I like when my historical figures have some personality. But hatred of Indians did form no small part of that personality. That's why he was the man for the job, even if he wished he wasn't. I've managed to get more use out of this than just clowning on John Cremony, so $50 well spent. I opened it upside down. His 1868 campaign in Idaho won him a reputation as an Indian fighter. In 1870, General Canby relieved him, making Crook available the following spring when the Department of Arizona needed a commander. Crook did not want the job but took it, having been promised a new assignment in the fall. He remained in Arizona 4 years. You know what, actually, I'm not squinting in the sun, I'm doing hunter's eyes, I'm looks-maxing. George Crook was an avid hunter and outdoorsman, and just in general seemed to be a real salt-of-the-earth type. Crook set an inspiring example. Often, when an exhausted patrol collapsed in camp, he would take a shotgun and go out into the dusk, returning with a pack full of dead birds to cook for next day's breakfast. His troops knew that in the hour of danger, Crook would be found on the skirmish line, and not in the telegraph office. Crook would improve upon U.S. military tactics in the Southwest in numerous ways, mostly in terms of logistics, and also by putting forth a bold idea. What if we didn't fight Apache? They're very scary, and I don't like it. What if we got Apache to fight Apache? While Indian scouts had been used by the U.S. before, Apache scouts would prove to be the most lethal and effective. Apache scouts were a greater asset to the United States military than any fancy toy that Skunk Works could cook up. You tell he is constantly angry that Osama fucked with his horses? He's dead by 9/12. Crook gradually came to depend almost entirely on the Apaches for his scouts. The Paiutes are not heard of after the earliest expeditions. The Navajos never amounted to much. The Maricopas were sent home as worthless, and the Pimas lasted longer, but were ultimately replaced too. The Yavapai were most valuable in the country they knew best, and as command worked farther eastward, they gradually were replaced by Tontos and other Apaches. It must be understood how much Arizonans and New Mexicans of all colors, including other Indians, genuinely hated the Apache. And now George Crook is giving them guns. In true American fashion, however, George Crook understood that the only way to stop a bad Apache with a gun was a good Apache with a gun. I demand that our nation's schools be guarded by Apache scouts. But where George Crook came to Arizona as a stick, then President Grant also sent a carrot. The pious General Oliver Howard was sent not to defeat the Apache, but to make peace with them, particularly with Cochise. Howard was a deeply religious man, and Crook did not care for him. I was very much amused at the General's opinion of himself. He told me that he thought the Creator had placed him on Earth to be the Moses to the black man. Having accomplished that mission, he felt satisfied that his next mission was with the Indian. So on one hand, Howard was clearly annoying as fuck. Conversely, he was a lifelong abolitionist who had lost his arm in the Civil War fighting Confederates, and then he stayed in the military. Surely you get some credit for that. Neither Crook nor the local Arizona papers cared much for the Jesus freak general being appointed here. When General Howard first met with Apache leaders, he dropped to his knees and began praying loudly, like with the one hand, I guess. And the Apache scattered. They calmed down later when it was explained that he was not making bad medicine against them. We will return to General Howard later as I explain his bold plan to defeat the Apache via a lock-in at the rec center where they will play Wii bowling and talk about how you cannot touch yourself. Crook had more aims with his Apache scouts than just using them to more effectively track the often so elusive Apache. He wanted to use them to demonstrate the benefits of working with the US Army instead of against them. I mean, look at how well fed and paid these troops we have are. And also, well, there was a darker reason. It is not merely a question of catching Apache better with Indians, but a broader and more enduring proposition: their disintegration. He was turning them against each other. Crook also employed spies, like men on the inside of these Apache tribes who would act as informants. Crook's controversial Apache scouts would be put to the test with the famous Tonto Basin campaign, a ruthless military operation which took place over the winter of 1872 to 1873. Winter was the time when the Apache struggled most to secure food, and a time when the army could depend on snowmelt for water. Find the water. The campaign was brutal, short, and decisive. Three things that no other military officer in Arizona had managed by that time. This quote is from Crook's autobiography, so troublesome source. But all the same, Crook recorded this encounter with a particularly fearsome Tonto Apache chief. Delche commenced crying and said he would do anything he would be ordered to do. He wanted to save his people, as they were starving. Every rock had turned into a soldier, and his people were hunted down as they never had been before. He had nothing to ask for but his life. He would accept any terms. He said he had 125 warriors last fall, and if anybody had told him he couldn't whip the world, he would have laughed at them. But now he had only 20 left. He said they used to have no difficulty in eluding the troops, but now the very rocks had gotten soft. They couldn't put their foot anywhere without leaving an impression by which we could follow. The goal of the Tonto Basin campaign was not to defeat the Tonto in open battle. You couldn't force the Apache into open battle. The plan was to demoralize them, hound them relentlessly. The skill of Apache warriors was obviously profound, but they were and are people. And people get cold, people get hungry, people need to sleep. Crook believed that peace with Indians was only possible if they'd been convinced that their situation was hopeless. And so he convinced them, over a single, brutal winter campaign. As our troops and captured Apache prisoners drew nigh to the side of the post, it seemed as if from behind clusters of sagebrush, first one, then another, then a third Apache would silently join the column, with at most the greeting of, "My brother." But the Tonto Apache were only an appetizer. Crook wanted the big bad. He wanted Chief Cochise, a name which still inspired terror in the hearts and minds of Arizonans and New Mexicans. Allegedly they have those things. But General Howard and his adherence to peace and negotiation. The coward! The big problem that Howard had trying to make peace with Cochise was the same problem that Cushing had. How do you find this motherfucker? We had tried to trap him before. We had trapped and tortured and killed his mentor Mangas, and so for some reason he's really scared to meet with us now. How do you make peace in the Southwest? We just gotta find the courier. General Howard and Tom Jeffords exchanged pleasantries, and then the general got down to business. He wanted Jeffords to take a message to Cochise and arrange for a parley. Jeffords took a long puff on his cigar and said, "General Howard, Cochise won't come. The man that wants to talk to Cochise must go where he is." "Do you know where he is?" Howard asked. "I can find him," Jeffords replied. "Will you go to him with a message from me?" the general asked. Jeffords smiled, took a long, slow pull on the cigar, and replied, "General, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will take you to Cochise." Howard did not hesitate to reply, "I will go with you, Mr. Jeffords." I like General Howard. I'm now officially biased. Also, he had one arm, which is cool. General Howard's journey to meet Cochise was racked with tension and doubt. He was alone, save for one Army captain, Tom Jeffords, and 2 Apache escorts. Out of this whole story, it's like the most Wild West shit. I absolutely love it. When they were still 70 miles from Cochise's stronghold, Howard witnessed an impressive display of Indian alertness. Che abruptly stopped, built a fire, and sent a smoke signal into the air. Then, walking ahead of the rest of the party, he barked like a coyote. From high above, a coyote cry answered him. Che ran up a mountain and soon returned with one of Cochise's scouts. The man informed Howard's entourage that he'd been trailing them for 2 days and 40 miles. Cochise would negotiate with Howard an incredibly generous treaty, no doubt earned by both Cochise's skill as a negotiator And, as a warrior, he had made America bleed, to put it lightly. Cochise secured a fairly large reservation around Apache Pass, the very place where Mangas had been wounded and where Cochise's own family had been hanged by Bascom. On other reservations, the Apache would be forced to farm and wear dehumanizing tags and report to head counts, per Crook's instructions. Cochise's Apache could move freely throughout their entire reservation, and they weren't allowed to go down into Mexico. Cochise achieved a peace that even Mangas would have been able to live with. Peace which maintained the Chiricahua identity and kept them from being reduced to prisoners, guarded by US troops. But Cochise had one big term that he needed met. He insisted that Tom Jeffords be the Indian agent assigned to the Chiricahua reservation. You could imagine how a pioneer who looks like this felt about paperwork and working for the government, but for his friend, and indeed his countrymen, Jeffords accepted the role. Peace was achieved. Do you remember Cushing, like the great Indian fighter citation needed? Oh, how I clowned on him for being murked by some random Apache. Oh, what laughs were had. Ha ha ha, we said. No, he was not murked by some random Apache. Number one, Joe is a very important figure who we'll get into more in depth in the next video, but he was murked by the angel of death of the American Southwest. He was killed by the whole reason I made this video. During the peace talks with Cochise, the army captain who accompanied Howard noticed something. One of the warriors with Cochise was wearing an unusually high-quality shirt. Like it had eyelets, like it was very fine fabric. Like, where'd you get this shirt, buddy? The army captain inched ever closer to the scowling warrior who wore a white man's shirt, and just as the council concluded, made a startling discovery. Written on the bottom of the shirt, as a laundry mark, was the name Cushing. The army captain shuddered, for before him sat the killer of Cushing. As they walked away from the council circle, the captain inquired if Jeffords knew the name of the warrior in the white shirt. Of course he knew, for it was the Bedonkohe Apache, Goyakla, the warrior the Mexicans called Geronimo. Just wanted to make a fucking video about Geronimo. But then, I learned more about this, and the fact is, I couldn't make Mangas and I couldn't make Cochise side characters in Geronimo's story. This video was about Geronimo, but he was in the background here. He fought with Mangas in Mexico during the 1850s. He fought side by side Cochise during the Bascom affair. He was with Joe in the attack on Cushing and stole the fucker's shirt and then wore it to peace talks with the US Army. He did not pick that shirt at random. Geronimo has been in this entire story, but he had yet to, at this time, achieve that most unenviable of positions, becoming a named character in history. What made Geronimo achieve that dubious distinction was this. Cochise wasn't well. Cochise had watched his people be driven to desperate ends over the decade plus of war with the US. No longer could they live and travel as they wished. They now had to spend most of their time sheltered in the Dragoon Mountains, afraid to even make fires, lest the White Eyes spot them. Cochise claimed that he had killed 10 White Eyes for every Apache slain, and that's probably about right, but there were a lot of white men. Cochise was not well. His stomach caused him intense pain, and he struggled to keep his food down, and it seemed clear to me that he wanted to leave his people in a position of relative peace and security before he left this world. He didn't. Cochise did die in a way that wasn't fitting for a figure of his stature, but America had nothing to do with it. He was a legend, a chief, and a warrior, and he had stomach cancer. On June 7th, 1874, Tom Jeffords met Cochise for the last time. The agent had hoped to stay at the chief's deathbed in the stronghold, but he needed to cross the Sulphur Springs Valley to issue rations. Many years later, Jeffords recalled his last conversation with the chief. As he said goodbye, Cochise asked, "Do you think you will ever see me again?" A startled Jeffords answered honestly, "I do not know. I don't think I will. You've been failing very rapidly in the last 3 days, and I think that by tomorrow night you will be dead." Cochise agreed. "I think so too. About tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock I will pass out, but do you think we will ever meet again?" "I don't know. What do you think about it?" "Well," said Cochise, "I've been giving it a good deal of thought since I've been sick here, and I think we will." "Where?" "I don't know. Somewhere up there." Cochise pointed to the sky. True to his prediction, the great chief died on the morning of June 8th. You know, it was this funny thing. Whenever the Apache were doing peace talks, they had this habit, or like it was this rhetorical thing, I suppose. They'd put this rock on the ground and they would say, "Our treaty will last until this rock melts." It'd be nice if we were the same. In the next video, we will discuss a legendary Apache warrior woman, the last great chief of the Chihenne Apache, Geronimo's rise to prominence, and a little German boy who was drafted into the war for survival. Thank you for watching.
Riding through the valley of sorrow on a worn-out horse, clinging to the reins, but his fate is